What would you do if the world you once trusted turned against you? If you had been pushed to the edge by years of torment and humiliation, with no one to turn to, how far would you go to make them pay? For some, revenge is a distant thought, but for others, it becomes an overwhelming obsession. This is the story of Emily Carter, a quiet, reserved student who endured endless bullying for far too long. No one ever noticed her struggles, and the pain she felt seemed invisible to everyone around her. But one fateful day, that silence would shatter. Emily would take matters into her own hands in a way that no one could have ever imagined. Stay tuned, because you're about to hear the chilling story of Emily's revenge. A revenge that didn't end with just one person paying the price. The twist. It's not who you think it is. Stick with us as we unfold the mystery behind a tragic death and the shocking revelation that would leave everyone questioning the truth. What happened that day, and why was the ultimate punishment not delivered to the one who seemed most deserving? Prepare yourself for a story that will have you second-guessing everything you thought you knew. This is a tale of vengeance, justice, and a dangerous line between the two. Stay with us, the truth will be revealed soon. Wait, before you see this insane story, drop a comment right now, and tell me where you're watching from. And if this video shocks you, trust me, it will. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we drop even crazier videos every week, and you don't want to miss them. In the small, quiet town of Oak Ridge, nestled in the heart of Tennessee, on a crisp, ordinary Monday morning in October, the calm of the school day was shattered. Oak Ridge was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, a town that seemed to thrive on familiarity. The school, Oak Ridge High, was no different. It was a place where the students knew the teachers by name, and the principal, Mr. Thompson, greeted everyone with a firm handshake as they entered the building. On the surface it was a peaceful, almost idyllic community. But in the depths of this seemingly perfect town, something dark had been growing for years, something no one noticed until it was too late. It was just like any other school day at Oak Ridge High, except this time, the air was heavy. Tension hung in the hallways like a thick fog, a quiet murmur replacing the usual chatter. Everyone felt it, though no one dared to speak of it. It wasn't until later that anyone could pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Emily Carter, a 17-year-old senior, had been a student at Oak Ridge High for the past 4 years. She wasn't the most popular girl, nor was she a complete outsider. She was invisible, a shy, quiet girl who preferred the comfort of the library over the chaos of the cafeteria. She was known for her gentle demeanor and her ability to blend into the background. She was the girl who walked the halls unnoticed, with no friends to speak of, no one to turn to when the torment began. Emily's family life was just as lonely. Her mother, a nurse at the local hospital, worked long shifts, often leaving Emily to fend for herself. Her father had left when she was just a child, and there was never much communication with him after that. Emily's world was small. Her books, her dreams, and the quiet corners of Oak Ridge High where she could escape. But behind her gentle eyes, behind her timid smile, there was a growing anger, an anger that no one knew about, an anger that had been festering for months, maybe years. Emily had been the target of cruel taunts, harsh whispers, and outright bullying from a group of popular students. It wasn't just the usual high school teasing. This was far worse. She was regularly shoved into lockers, humiliated in front of her peers, and verbally assaulted by the same group of classmates who seemed to think it was all a game. Every day the torment grew worse, and every day Emily's spirit withered a little more. But Emily never fought back. She never raised her voice. To the outside world, she was the perfect victim, quiet, withdrawn, an easy target. But inside, something was slowly changing. Emily's pain began to transform into something darker, something dangerous. It happened on the afternoon of October 22nd. Emily, who had been absent from school for a few days, returned that morning with a sense of resolve. To everyone else, it seemed like just another day. But as the bell rang and students shuffled to their classrooms, Emily entered room 203, where a group of her tormentors sat in the back corner. They exchanged mocking glances as she passed, their eyes gleaming with a sense of superiority, unaware that this time Emily had a plan. By the time lunch came around, Emily was sitting alone at the cafeteria table, as usual. She had brought her lunch, a simple sandwich, and a bottle of water. But what no one knew, what no one could have suspected, was that inside that bottle of water, something had been added, something that would change everything. Emily had secretly slipped a potent, slow-acting poison into the bottle. Something she had found in an obscure corner of the internet. She had planned it meticulously, researching how to make the poison undetectable, how to ensure it worked quickly without raising suspicion. It wasn't an act of anger, not at first. It was something more calculated, something more precise. It was, in Emily's mind, justice. She had no intention of hurting anyone other than the ones who had tormented her. But fate has a cruel way of rewriting the script. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Emily sat quietly, watching as her tormentors laughed and joked amongst themselves. But then, Sarah Thompson, the leader of the group, who had made Emily's life a living hell for years, took a sip from the bottle, thinking it was her own. Sarah's eyes widened as she swallowed, her face contorting into a look of confusion. She suddenly felt dizzy, her vision blurring. She looked around, trying to focus, trying to understand what was happening. But the world around her began to spin. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the poisoning took hold. Sarah collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, unable to breathe. A few moments later, her body went limp. The cafeteria fell into chaos, as students screamed and rushed to her side. But it was too late. The poison had already done its work. As the paramedics arrived and tried desperately to save Sarah, it was clear to everyone in the room that something wasn't right. How had Sarah been poisoned? Who would do such a thing? The questions swirled, but the answers weren't forthcoming. The authorities quickly ruled out food poisoning, and the investigation began. Was this a random act, or had someone close to Sarah, intended for her to suffer? The initial suspicion fell on Emily, but there was no evidence to link her directly to the crime. The investigation soon began to reveal more than anyone could have anticipated. It was at this point that the mystery truly deepened. Was this just a tragic accident? A case of mistaken identity? An unfortunate turn of events? Or had Emily, in her pain, taken justice into her own hands in a moment of overwhelming fury? One thing was certain. Sarah Thompson's death was no ordinary incident. And the question on everyone's mind was this: who would be next? Sarah Thompson, the 18-year-old senior at Oak Ridge High, was far from the typical teenager. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. With long blonde hair that shimmered under the school's fluorescent lights, a confident stride, and an easy smile that charmed nearly everyone. Sarah was the picture of popularity. She moved through life with a crowd of followers, her social circle large, her influence undeniable. On the surface, Sarah appeared to have it all: looks, friends, and a reputation as the queen bee of Oak Ridge High. To most, she was untouchable. But behind the glossy exterior, Sarah had a side no one truly understood. Beneath her perfect image, she wore her own scars. Growing up in a broken home, with a distant father and a mother who was too busy working to care, Sarah learned early how to fend for herself. She had always been a fighter, but not in the way many would think. She used her beauty, her charm, and her popularity to manipulate those around her. She didn't just belong to the in crowd, she ruled it. For all of her success and popularity, however, Sarah harbored a deeply rooted insecurity. Her need for control, for power over others, was a direct result of years of emotional neglect. This was how she treated Emily Carter. Sarah saw Emily as weak, a target ripe for bullying. It began small: gossip behind Emily's back, snide remarks in the hallways, but quickly escalated into something more personal. "I heard your mom doesn't even have time to feed you, Carter," Sarah had once sneered as she shoved Emily into a locker. "I guess that's why you're always so hungry for attention. It's a pity you don't get enough at home." The taunts, the mockery, those words stung deep, far deeper than anyone could imagine. But Emily never fought back. She would just take it, quietly enduring the cruelty day after day. Sarah's cruelty became her shield. Her smirk, her laughing eyes, were her weapons. But over time, as Emily's pain grew, so did the darkness that filled her heart. Sarah never realized that the girl she so loved to torment could hold such power in the quiet silence of her suffering. When Sarah Thompson was found dead, the list of suspects was immediate, and it wasn't long before the investigators turned their attention to Emily Carter. After all, Emily had been in close proximity to Sarah on that fateful day, and the most obvious suspect in any crime is the one closest to the victim. But was it Emily, or was there someone else who held a deeper, darker grudge? Emily had been the victim of Sarah's relentless bullying for years, but no one had ever suspected Emily to be capable of revenge. She was a quiet, introverted girl, who kept to herself. Teachers had always seen her as a model student, polite, obedient, but somewhat distant. The other students barely noticed her, except for the occasional cruel joke, a sneering comment. Emily rarely spoke to anyone, except for a handful of quiet classmates who had their own demons to battle. But as the investigation began, more came to light about her. Emily had been seen slipping away from the school cafeteria just before Sarah collapsed. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. An empty space, a moment of time when no one was watching. And then there was the bottle of water. Emily had been seen walking to the lunch table with it, and some believed she had intentionally swapped bottles, a chillingly calculated move that had gone unnoticed. Could Emily have done this? Was the poisoning her way of reclaiming control, her last act of defiance after years of suffering? Or was there another explanation? Liam Walker, a student who had always been Emily's classmate, but rarely a friend, became an early suspect as well. Liam had witnessed much of the bullying, standing on the sidelines, torn between sympathy and fear. He had often seen Emily's pain, but was too afraid to intervene. Was Liam involved, either as a reluctant accomplice or a quiet observer who simply watched it all unfold? Liam's nervous energy was telling. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, as though he feared the truth might come out about his role in this tragedy. Did he know something he wasn't saying? Or was he simply a victim of his own guilt for never stepping in when Emily needed someone the most? Chloe Harrison, another student in Sarah's inner circle, was a potential suspect as well. Chloe had always been the second in command to Sarah's reign of social dominance, but Chloe's role was often in the shadows, and no one could deny her quiet jealousy of Sarah's popularity. Was Chloe secretly envious of Sarah's position? Had the tension between them grown to a point where Chloe, too, had had enough of Sarah's cruel behavior toward others? Chloe had been overheard one afternoon, speaking with Sarah in a harsh tone, saying, "You've crossed too many lines. What if someone decides to do something about it?" Some believed Chloe's bitterness had finally reached a boiling point. But was she capable of orchestrating something as drastic as murder? Or was she simply a bystander to the events that unfolded? The investigation into Sarah Thompson's death was led by Detective James Garrett, a seasoned officer with years of experience in handling criminal cases. Garrett was known for his methodical approach and his attention to detail. He quickly realized that this was no ordinary case. It was complex, filled with layers of pain, betrayal, and unresolved anger. Garrett's first instinct was to look at the people closest to Sarah, the ones who knew her best. But as Garrett began to investigate, he realized something crucial. This case wasn't about Sarah's death alone. It was about the unspoken culture of bullying that had been allowed to thrive under the radar for so long. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was the culmination of years of mistreatment. With the help of Officer Linda Stevens, Garrett began speaking with students, piecing together Sarah's relationships with her classmates. They interviewed Emily's teachers, friends, and those who had witnessed the bullying firsthand. Slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. Emily's silence, her isolation, her apparent surrender to the cruel treatment. It all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Emily had suffered long enough. But the deeper they dug, the more complicated the case became. Garrett and Stevens found themselves tangled in a web of conflicting stories, incomplete evidence, and cryptic statements. Emily had been seen near the scene, yes, but no one could definitively place the poison in her hands. The school had no footage of Sarah's poisoning, only chaos and panic in the cafeteria. It seemed that there was far more to this case than anyone had initially thought. As the investigation unfolded, Garrett realized he had only scratched the surface of a much larger problem. He could see the tension between the students, the trauma that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. And the more they uncovered about Emily's life, her isolation, her pain, and the unbearable cruelty she had faced, the more Garrett began to wonder if the true story had yet to be told. This was no longer just about the death of one girl, this was a story about many lives destroyed by the horrors of bullying and the consequences of letting it go unchecked. What would happen now? Would the truth finally come to light, or would it remain buried in the shadows, just as Emily had been for so long? The investigation into Sarah Thompson's tragic death began with a sense of urgency. Detective James Garrett, though experienced, knew that cases like this were never straightforward, especially when the victims were teenagers and emotions ran high. Sarah had been a popular student, loved by many, but also hated by a few. The first challenge was determining who had the motive to end her life. The scene at the school cafeteria was chaotic. A whirlwind of panicked students and paramedics fighting to save Sarah's life. But amidst the confusion, Garrett knew there were critical clues waiting to be uncovered. The most obvious piece of evidence was Sarah herself. She had collapsed suddenly, her body convulsing as she gasped for breath. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. The immediate cause of death was a severe poisoning, and the autopsy report confirmed it. The toxicology report was a chilling confirmation of what everyone feared: the poison in Sarah's system wasn't something easily found. It was a rare substance, undetectable to the untrained eye, and had been deliberately administered in a way that made it seem like an accident. The poison had been slow-acting, with symptoms appearing hours after ingestion. The investigators knew that whoever had orchestrated this had taken great care to ensure that the poison wasn't detected immediately. But it wasn't just Sarah's body that raised suspicions. There were also the surroundings of the crime scene. The cafeteria table where Sarah had sat was in disarray, a half-eaten sandwich and a bottle of water, the very bottle Emily had brought in that morning, lay scattered among the chaos. The water bottle, while innocuous at first glance, held secrets. The label was torn, and it had been opened recently. Detective Garrett noticed something else: a faint smear of lipstick on the bottle's rim, as though someone had hastily taken a sip. The residue matched the lipstick shade that Sarah was known to wear. There was no clear evidence at first glance that would directly implicate Emily. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no clear confession. But the question remained: how had the poison made its way into Sarah's hands? As Garrett meticulously examined the evidence, he found something else that seemed out of place: a cell phone, lying discarded beneath the table. Screen cracked. It was Emily's phone. But Emily hadn't been anywhere near Sarah when the poisoning happened. Had she? The phone contained a series of messages that painted an unsettling picture of Emily's life in the days leading up to the tragedy. A few were innocuous enough, simple texts to her mother, messages about homework. But a series of other texts caught Garrett's attention. The messages were from Emily to a friend, someone who had witnessed the bullying, someone who was all too aware of the torment Emily had suffered. In one message, Emily wrote, "I've had enough. They'll see. I'm done being weak." It was a stark admission of the pain Emily was enduring, a moment of clarity in the midst of the torment she faced every day. The message was dated a week before Sarah's death. But there was more. Garrett found other messages that had been deleted, remnants of a conversation that suggested Emily had been planning something, preparing for a moment of reckoning. Was this a message of defiance, or had Emily been consumed by the desire for vengeance? But as the investigation deepened, Garrett found that not everything added up. The timeline of events became increasingly murky. While Emily had been seen near Sarah during lunch, no one had actually witnessed her slipping the poison into the bottle. The more the investigators dug, the more contradictions they found in witness statements. Liam Walker, who had been in the cafeteria at the time, claimed to have seen Emily near the table, but was unable to remember specific details about the moments leading up to Sarah's collapse. Chloe Harrison, another witness, was far more confident in her recollection, but her story didn't match up with anyone else's. Chloe insisted that she had seen Emily slip something into the water bottle. But when Garrett reviewed the security footage, there was no clear evidence to support her claim. Emily was barely visible on the grainy footage, and while it was clear she had walked past Sarah's table, there was no definitive moment where she interacted with the water bottle. It was frustrating, an investigation grounded in uncertainties and contradictions. Even stranger was the report from the school janitor, who had been cleaning the cafeteria shortly before the incident. The janitor mentioned something that no one had thought to ask: a strange smell, almost like something burning in the air near the tables. Could it have been a clue? What was that smell? And why hadn't anyone followed up on it earlier? Then there was the bottle itself. It had been tested for traces of other substances: caffeine, alcohol, any chemical that might have been added to cause Sarah's collapse. But the results came back clear. There was nothing to suggest that Sarah had consumed anything out of the ordinary except the poison. But there was something about that bottle that gnawed at Garrett. Something wasn't right. With the evidence pointing in multiple directions, several theories emerged, each more perplexing than the last. Some investigators believed that Emily had been the lone perpetrator, that the act of revenge was a culmination of years of pent-up anger. They argued that the broken pieces of Emily's life, her isolation, the bullying, the way she had been pushed to the edge, made her the most obvious suspect. After all, who else could it have been? Others, however, began to question Emily's involvement. What if this was an accident? What if the poison had been slipped into the wrong bottle, and Sarah had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time? It wasn't impossible. In fact, it was a theory that gained some traction as investigators discovered more about the interactions between Emily and her classmates. Could it have been someone else trying to frame Emily? Was there another person who had been plotting something just as dark? The red herrings began to pile up. A close friend of Emily's, another victim of Sarah's bullying, came forward with a startling claim. Emily wasn't alone. She had been confiding in others, venting her frustration. But the friend insisted that Emily had been angry. Yes, but not murderous. Could someone else have been pulling the strings, whispering words of revenge into Emily's ears? The possibility of a second party involved in Sarah's death sent the investigation into a new direction. Could Chloe Harrison, the envious friend, have played a role in the poisoning? Her jealousy of Sarah had been well documented, and many believed she was capable of taking things too far. Perhaps she had gone rogue, decided to exact her own form of punishment on Sarah, but no one could prove it. Chloe maintained her innocence, and her story remained consistent, though it didn't match up with the growing body of evidence against Emily. Meanwhile, Liam Walker's behavior remained suspicious. Was his refusal to testify more than just fear of getting involved? Was there something he knew, something he was withholding? Detective Garrett's instincts told him that Liam was hiding something, but what? As the investigation progressed, Garrett became more convinced that there was a deeper, more complicated truth to uncover. The mystery surrounding Sarah Thompson's death wasn't just about the poisoning, it was about the school, the culture that had allowed bullying to thrive unchecked for so long. The bullying had created an environment where vengeance seemed inevitable. Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Theories continued to evolve, but one thing remained clear: the investigation was far from over. The deeper they went, the more complicated the truth became. Would they find the person responsible, or would they find themselves lost in a web of lies and deception? The clock was ticking, and as Garrett would soon discover, the truth was even more elusive than he could have ever imagined. For months, Detective James Garrett had been staring at the evidence in frustration. The case had seemed like an endless maze, each lead turning into another dead end. Emily Carter was the prime suspect. No doubt, everything pointed to her. The texts, the strained silence, the lack of witnesses who could account for the crucial moments leading up to Sarah's death. The more Garrett looked into Emily's background, the more the pieces fell into place. The bullying, the isolation, the unspoken rage that had been building for years. But there was always something nagging at Garrett. Something didn't feel right. How had Emily, so quiet, so withdrawn, managed to pull off such a calculated act of vengeance? She didn't have the means, the confidence, the motive, to orchestrate something as cruel and definitive as murder. There had to be something more. And then, just when it seemed like the case was doomed to remain unsolved, a breakthrough came. One that no one could have predicted. It all started with a small, seemingly insignificant detail: a phone call. A call made to Emily Carter's mother, Mrs. Carter, just days before Sarah's death. The call had been dismissed as just another routine interaction, but in hindsight, it became clear that it had been anything but ordinary. Mrs. Carter had received a call from a woman she didn't recognize. The woman was calm but persistent, asking questions about Emily's behavior, her social circle, and whether or not she had been showing any signs of distress. Mrs. Carter had brushed it off as someone from the school, perhaps a concerned teacher or counselor, checking on Emily after her absence. But the phone number didn't match the school directory. It wasn't until the investigators traced the number back that they uncovered something that would change everything. The number belonged to Rebecca Carter, Emily's estranged aunt. Rebecca had been a shadowy figure in Emily's life, someone who had disappeared after a family dispute years ago. But what no one had realized was that Rebecca, for reasons yet unknown, had been keeping tabs on Emily from a distance. She had watched her niece struggle with the bullying, and she had watched as Emily withdrew further and further into herself. But unlike the others, Rebecca had a deep understanding of Emily's pain, and for Rebecca, that pain had become personal. The moment Garrett uncovered Rebecca Carter's identity, the puzzle pieces began to fit into place. The truth, however, was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Rebecca Carter wasn't just a concerned family member, she had been Emily's hidden ally, the one person who understood exactly what Emily was going through. And it wasn't simply that Rebecca wanted to see justice done. No, Rebecca had planned the entire poisoning. She had manipulated Emily into carrying out the act of vengeance. Rebecca had been quietly feeding Emily ideas, whispering in her ear, nurturing the anger that had been building inside her niece for so long. Rebecca had been the one to introduce Emily to the dark web, a place where poisons could be bought and plans could be laid without fear of detection. She had been the one to suggest the slow-acting poison, one that would be almost impossible to trace until it was too late. Emily, desperate to stop the endless torment, had only needed a push, a final word of encouragement. Rebecca's own history was just as shadowed as Emily's. She had grown up in a violent household, a place where she had witnessed the kind of cruelty that Emily had suffered. Rebecca had no love for the school, nor for the system that allowed bullying to thrive unchecked. But more than that, Rebecca harbored a deep-seated hatred for Sarah Thompson, the girl who had been at the center of Emily's torment. Rebecca had watched Sarah torment her niece for years, and in her mind Sarah had become the embodiment of everything that was wrong with the world, a world that had failed both Emily and her. When the plan was set in motion, it was clear that Emily had been nothing more than a puppet. Rebecca had convinced her niece that this was the only way to restore balance, to take control of a life that had been stolen from her. Emily, in her vulnerability, had listened, but Rebecca had underestimated one thing: the consequences of her actions. As the investigation continued, the truth came out piece by piece. Garrett discovered a diary that Emily had kept, though not the kind of diary anyone expected. This wasn't a place where Emily poured out her soul. No. It was a list of names. Names of those who had tormented her. Names of those who had made her life unbearable. At the bottom of the list, there was one final name: Sarah Thompson. And under that name, there was a note written in Emily's delicate hand. She must pay for what she did. But even more devastating was what Garrett found after a second search of Emily's phone. Hidden in a folder marked private, there was a series of video recordings. The first few were innocuous, but one recording stopped Garrett cold. In it, Emily sat in front of the camera, her voice barely above a whisper, but unmistakably calm. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is the only way. She won't stop. She can't, and neither can I." Then came the chilling confession from Rebecca herself. The audio was faint, but it was clear enough to make Garrett's blood run cold. Rebecca was the one who had coached Emily on how to slip the poison into Sarah's water bottle. She had been there, in the shadows, encouraging Emily to follow through. "This is the only way," Rebecca had said. "She'll never hurt you again. You'll finally have control." As Garrett listened, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Rebecca Carter had orchestrated everything. She had been the mastermind, the one who had pushed Emily over the edge, turning her into an instrument of revenge. What had brought everything crashing down was a single fatal error that neither Emily nor Rebecca had anticipated. After the poisoning, Rebecca had tried to cover her tracks, but she had underestimated the power of Emily's conscience. In a fit of guilt and confusion, Emily had made one final desperate attempt to make things right. She had sent a message to her friend, telling her everything, the truth about Rebecca's involvement, the dark plans that had unfolded in the shadows. That message, that final cry for help, was what eventually led Detective Garrett to uncover the twisted truth. It wasn't Emily who had acted alone. It was Rebecca Carter, the quiet, hidden force, who had manipulated everything from behind the scenes, using Emily's pain and desperation as a weapon to destroy not only Sarah Thompson, but also everything that Emily had once known. When Garrett confronted Emily with the evidence, she was broken, tears streaming down her face as the weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She hadn't wanted to kill Sarah. She hadn't wanted to destroy anyone. But Rebecca's influence had been too strong, too all-encompassing. The final twist, the revelation that Rebecca had been the true puppet master, would forever change the way the town of Oak Ridge saw the events that transpired that fateful October day. It was a tale of manipulation, of love twisted into something dark and destructive, and of a young girl caught between her need for revenge and the remnants of the humanity she had left. The truth revealed. The culprit wasn't just a victim of bullying. It was a family member, someone who had seen the world through the same lens of bitterness and vengeance, someone who had planned the poisoning with a chilling precision. And in the end, the poison didn't just destroy Sarah Thompson, it destroyed the lives of everyone it touched. The question remained, would anyone in Oak Ridge ever truly recover from the scars left behind by that fateful day? Would Emily ever be able to forgive herself for the life she had taken? Or would she always be haunted by the ghost of her aunt's twisted influence? The resolution of the case brought some semblance of closure, but it was clear that for everyone involved, especially the families and the community, the damage had already been done. After months of investigation and piecing together the shocking details of Emily and Rebecca's involvement, the legal system moved swiftly to bring justice. Rebecca Carter, the true mastermind behind Sarah Thompson's death, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. Her role in manipulating her niece Emily into carrying out the poisoning was laid bare during the trial. Rebecca's calm demeanor throughout the proceedings only served to underscore the chilling nature of her actions. She showed little remorse for what she had done, viewing it as a necessary act of vengeance against a world that had wronged both her and Emily. Emily Carter, still deeply affected by her aunt's manipulation, faced charges as well. She was charged with manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder. However, due to her age, her vulnerability, and the undeniable evidence that she had been coerced by Rebecca, Emily was granted a more lenient sentence than one might expect. She was sentenced to juvenile detention, but her case was reviewed after 5 years to determine if she was eligible for parole. It was a bittersweet resolution. No one would ever truly be able to move past the horror that had unfolded at Oak Ridge High. The school, once a quiet and seemingly safe environment, was forever changed. The staff and students alike were left to process the fallout of a tragedy that they could not have foreseen. For Sarah Thompson's family, there could be no real closure. Sarah's mother, a single parent who had been blind to her daughter's suffering, was left to grieve the loss of her child, her heart broken by the knowledge that she had failed to protect her. Sarah's father, who had been absent for much of her life, returned to Oak Ridge after her death, but his presence only seemed to magnify the family's pain. The guilt of their inability to intervene sooner weighed heavily on them both, and there were no answers to soothe the ache of loss. Sarah's friends, those who had once celebrated her popularity, were left with an unsettling void. Many of them couldn't reconcile the image of Sarah they had known with the truth that had emerged about the bullying she had inflicted upon Emily. The community was split. Some saw Emily as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by her aunt into committing an unforgivable act. Others couldn't find it in their hearts to forgive her, feeling that no amount of suffering could justify taking a life. The school's response to the tragedy was swift, but it was also somewhat reactive. The administration implemented new anti-bullying programs, and there was an increased focus on mental health awareness. However, the measures felt insufficient to many. Students were given new resources, and teachers were trained to better identify signs of bullying and emotional distress. But the true depth of the emotional toll wasn't so easily addressed. How could the school prevent another tragedy like this one, when for years the bullying had been so systemic and so deeply ingrained in the student body? For the community, the tragedy became a painful reminder that no one really knew what went on behind closed doors. Emily had been a quiet, invisible girl, and Sarah had been the girl everyone adored. But the truth was, both of them had been trapped. Emily in the cycle of torment, and Sarah in the web of superficiality and fear. And now, both were gone. While the case may seem closed, many questions still linger, questions that perhaps can never be answered fully. Could the investigation have missed something? Could there have been signs in Emily's life that went unnoticed? Or deeper aspects of Sarah's bullying that never came to light? Detective Garrett himself admitted that he couldn't help but wonder if there were more to the story than anyone had realized. Had the school ignored the signs of Sarah's cruelty for too long? Had they brushed off Emily's pain, treating her as invisible until it became too late? Could the intervention of a teacher, a friend, or even a stranger have prevented this tragedy from happening? The emotional toll on both Emily and Sarah had clearly been much deeper than anyone had anticipated, and the ripples of the event left scars on everyone in its wake. The bullying that led to Emily's actions was not an isolated incident. Many students at Oak Ridge High had faced similar treatment, whether from Sarah or others in the social hierarchy. Emily's case was a tragic example of what happens when a broken system allows such behavior to continue unchecked. But how many others, like Emily, had suffered in silence, hiding their pain behind quiet smiles or empty stares? The societal issues surrounding bullying, especially in high schools where power dynamics are so stark, are not easily solved. Was Sarah's behavior a product of her own insecurities, or had she learned to assert power over others as a result of her own upbringing? And what about Rebecca? Was she just an overprotective aunt, or had she been consumed by her own trauma and resentment, pushing Emily into a decision that would change their lives forever? As the dust settled, and the community moved on, the debate continued. Was Emily fully responsible for Sarah's death, or was she merely a victim of manipulation? Did Rebecca's influence weigh too heavily on her niece, or was it Emily's anger that fueled the tragedy? Was there a point where Emily could have turned away, or was she too far gone to see the consequences of her actions? We can never know for sure, but we can ask ourselves, what would we have done in Emily's shoes? How would any of us handle years of torment, of being pushed to the edge, and then offered a way out? At what point does pain turn into rage? And at what point does that rage become deadly? As you reflect on this case, I invite you to consider your own theories. What drove Rebecca Carter to manipulate her niece so completely? Could she have seen her actions as a twisted form of protection for Emily? What could have been done to stop this tragedy before it happened? I encourage you to leave your thoughts, your questions, and your theories in the comments. Was this a tragedy of revenge, or was it a breakdown of a community that allowed a girl to suffer in silence for too long? What could have been done differently? Remember, this case may be closed in the eyes of the law, but for many the wounds are still fresh, and the questions are far from answered. Let's continue this conversation. What do you think? So what do you think really happened here? Was this a cold, calculated act of revenge, one that was a long time coming, and perhaps even justified, given the years of torment Emily had endured? Or was this, as many might argue, simply another tragic result of unchecked bullying, a devastating consequence of a system that failed to protect the most vulnerable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Emily was entirely to blame, or was she manipulated beyond redemption? What about Rebecca? Was her influence the driving force behind this tragedy? How do we stop something like this from happening again? This case, like so many others, leaves us questioning how we treat one another, how our actions can break or build the people around us. So what do you think? If you found this story as gripping and unsettling as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth true crime content. We have plenty more chilling cases to cover, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single one. And if you're hooked on this mystery and want to dive deeper into more true crime stories, hit that notification bell. We'll be exploring many more cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the next chapter in our journey into the dark corners of the truth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.